So recently, you might have seen these types of messages telling you that some of your plugins are no longer working. This seems to mostly have affected plugins such as ad blockers, a bit more on that later. This is because Google has decided to try and push out Manifest v3 again, after a lot of starts and stops over the last 2 years. And with most browsers being based on Chromium, so that's Brave, Opera, Edge, Chrome, etc. The only big browser that isn't Chromium based is Safari, but it's very closely related to it, so you know. And with Chromium browsers making up 75% of the market, this is something that will affect everybody. And as a quick explanation, Chromium is a lot more like building blocks. Imagine a car engine. You know how like some cars can look different and feel different, but they're all built with the same engine? This is similar as the base rendering engine and other stuff is similar between all of those browsers, and that they're just styled differently and maybe have some other additional features, but they all still have to play by the same rules. And these rules are laid on the manifests. And the newest changes seem to be most heavily affecting ad blockers, or at least the functionality that they heavily rely on. And even with the rollout, there is a bit of controversy, right? So there's like two main things to it. The first is the perceived unfairness of the rollout. So Manifest v3 is meant to be rolled out in stages, with plugins being told to update or be delisted from the plugin stores. And so far the first wave seems to largely be just affecting ad blockers. And with how the new rules are set out, it basically breaks the core of how every single ad blocker is meant to work. With the second issue is the manifest changes are mostly just locking browsers down. So under the v2 manifest, plugins had a lot more freedom, and with these changes, a lot of the higher functionality will be removed and no longer available. Interestingly, the things that are being removed were mostly used by ad blockers, and not a lot of other things. So naturally, lots of people are saying this was an intentional targeting of ad blockers, but I'll leave that one up to you. So according to Google, a big reason to push out these changes is because of security and such. And the things that are changing aren't really that much of a security risk. So the way most ad blockers work is they just block known advertising domains. So if you've ever been at work or at school and you try to go to a website that you weren't allowed to, you probably get a message like, can't connect. This is extremely similar, as schools and workplaces have their own list of URLs to ignore and not connect to. Granted, some ad blockers have fancier features, but like again, core concept is the same for a lot of them. And a lot of ad blockers automatically update the list of advertising domains. And this is being removed, or the ability for those plugins to do that. And the most frustrating thing in my opinion is the argument for Google, because it just doesn't make any sense. As they're saying they're doing this for security, except you can block domains on your computer's firewall, you can add custom ban lists on your router, or even use things like Pi-hole. Even your internet service provider can block stuff. So saying it's to reduce risk makes very little sense, especially since you're reducing the amount of websites you can connect to. And this is where the conspiracy theories start to come in. And I do love me a good conspiracy theory. So 76%, or approximately 240 of 300 billion of Alphabet's income comes from advertising. Alphabet is the company that owns Google. And this is why there has always been a lot of stuff going around about big tech and how they gather data in weird ways. So for example, there's very strong laws about how it's super not allowed to gather data from kids, and how there's strong rules about how you can advertise to them. So naturally, the old CEO of this platform was once caught bragging about how they have so many underage viewers, how they're gathering their data and advertising to them. And like most rappers, being arrested for crimes after rapping about doing said crimes, no one's really surprised that they ended up being caught and fined for it. Anyway, so with such a large percentage of income coming from ads, it's in their interest to get rid of ad blockers, as it limits the amount of ads they can sell to people. And with Google's massive influence in the browser market, they actually have the ability to get most of the things they want to get done. Granted, they might have gone a little bit overboard recently, as they are found to have a monopoly on browser markets, on browser engines, which is funny because they're literally bankrolling their competition to not get charged with that. Like their main rival, Mozilla, the people that make Firefox, they get most of their money from Google, so that Mozilla can stay in business and that Google isn't the only browser to market, avoiding the monopoly charge, but they still get charged. Which is interesting because that's what Microsoft used to do to avoid catching the charge for a monopoly in operating systems, so much so that they bought Apple stock and saved them from bankruptcy. So if you thought you could just jump to Firefox and keep your favorite plugins, maybe you can, but who knows if they won't roll something similar out themselves at the behest of their biggest patron. Or at least that's one of the bigger concerns people have with the situation. This also means this is the second monopoly charge for stuff to do with browsers. Granted, last time it was Microsoft, and it's a bit of a fun story, but I'm leaving that towards the end. But I know, you're sitting there, you're laughing because you use Apple. And Apple wouldn't take your data and force feed you ads. You know, they're focused on security and privacy, right? Well, they lost a lawsuit over false security claims, and they want to grow their ad revenue from 5 to 15%. Which just makes me think of that Sony patent, where you have to say the name of the brand for the ad to go away, and I feel like that time is getting closer and closer. Also, is it me or is it very scummy that they use McDonald's in their patent? Like, in my memory, this is a McDonald's patent, not a Sony one. But that's a side tangent. But enough doom and gloom. Some of you might be wondering, how can we keep our plugins working, our favorite ones? A couple options. Don't update your browser. probably not a great strategy in the long run. There are enterprise versions, which plan to keep compatibility with Manifest v2 for another year. It's also free from my understanding. Or you can use the weaker versions of the newer ad blocks. Or your last option is to switch to a non-Chromium based browser that isn't related to the Blink engine. So your only real options would be Firefox or other open source browsers like LibreWolf, but I'm not a security expert, so go watch one of those people if you want a read recommendation. But moving over to a smaller browser doesn't mean it's an easy fix. So I keep mentioning these rendering engines, and it's basically the thing that takes the code of a page and makes something that you can see on your screen. And while in theory, all pages should render the same way, that's not always the case. And sometimes these engines can have little quirks or do things slightly differently. A great example would be something like load order, something that sounds rather trivial, but in reality can break a lot of things. Just look at any forum where people are complaining about load order of mods and how you need to do it in a specific order for things to work. Same thing applies here. You load in components in the wrong order, it breaks stuff. So if you have a small browser with an uncommon rendering engine, some sites might just not work for you. And not every page is going to invest in fixing something that might barely affect a few % of users. And unfortunately, there isn't a lot smaller engines can do that nobody is developing for them. To me, browsers are just one of those things that have changed with time and profit motives, as browsers actually used to be paid products. Yeah, back in the day, you had to dish out the equivalent of about $120 for a browser. And the main thing that changed that is Microsoft performed an absolute gamer move and made Internet Explorer free to take out Netscape in the late 90s, which landed them a monopoly charge. And I realized that for the second or third time I've mentioned Microsoft and a monopoly charge, but that's just what the late 90s, early 2000s was for them. It's actually pretty wild. They were constantly in and out of court for stuff. Regardless, there doesn't seem to be any great direction to take if you want to keep all your favorite plugins, but soon that might matter a lot less as many platforms are working on integrating ads into the stream. So the ad is no longer coming from an external domain, but it's actually built into videos and other elements of the website. Similar to what platforms like Twitch are already using, and as of recent YouTube is also experimenting with this. And when that happens, you just get a black screen for the length of the ad that would have been there. Anyways, I promised a fun story. So Brendan Eich, this guy's a bit of an internet legend. He's the guy that came up with JavaScript. So to give you an idea, 98.5% of all websites use JavaScript, and it's the basis of Web 2.0. So if you've ever been on a website that's not a static page, it basically uses JavaScript. Hard to convey how big of a thing it is, but it's very big. Anyways, he used to work at Netscape, a tech company which was largely a web browser company. And then Microsoft took out Netscape by making browsers free, so they shifted their business model and became the Mozilla Foundation, the people behind Firefox. And Brendan moved with them and ended up on the board of directors. And the thing to understand about Brendan is he's a real libertarian. He really believes people should be able to do what they want, live the life that they want to do, live the life that they want to live, you know, all that stuff. So ironically enough, he got kicked out of the Mozilla Foundation for being against gay marriage and donating to organizations that were against it as well. So he basically told them, I'm going to make my own browser. So he went off and made Brave with that Futurama mentality. And the main driving point of Brave was privacy and no ads, and even had a little thing where they would replace ads on websites with their own ads to generate crypto for users and themselves. In fact, uBlock Origin is maintained by Brave, which takes it all the way back to the start, talking about ad blockers. Anyway, hope you learned something, and later.